Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
With the U.S. Postal Service under financial pressure, expanding into new government services could offer a path forward. But despite having the authority to do more, that effort hasn't moved much beyond passport processing. A new report from the Postal Service's Inspector General points to a lack of strategy and a fragmented approach inside the organization. David Garcia, research analyst with the Postal Service's Office of the Inspector General, is here to walk us through the details. David, it is great to have you back. Nice to see you.
It's nice to be here. Thank you, Terry.
You've got a new report out, and we're going to talk through some options for the Postal Service. But let's start with the Postal Service Reform Act of 2022, because it sets the stage for what you're looking at here. What was in that act, and why was it passed?
Well, that act touched on a number of different ways to improve the Postal Service's financial condition. The piece that's most relevant to this report is that it was enacted in 2022, but it allowed the Postal Service to expand its non-postal government services portfolio beyond the federal level. And what it did is allowed the Postal Service to go on to form partnerships with state, local, and tribal governments. So when we talk about non-postal government services, I'll just give you a little bit of background. So in addition to delivering mail and packages to every address in the country, the Postal Service also partners with government agencies to provide non-postal services. And what these partnerships do is they help agencies provide services to the public, but they can also generate much needed revenue for the Postal Service. So what this report does is it describes the government services that the Postal Service is currently providing, but we also identify a handful of opportunities for the Postal Service to expand its portfolio.
The Postal Service has had this authority since 2022, and it's been pretty challenging, apparently, to diversify that non-postal service portfolio. What's been so challenging about it?
Well, you're right. So actually, the Postal Service has not signed any agreements below the federal level since that legislation went into effect. That said, we spoke to a number of states for this project, and they showed a lot of interest in exploring opportunities with the Postal Service. And they showed interest actually in a handful of areas. So, for example, identity services. To give you an example there, in a lot of states, before essential workers like teachers or nurses can begin work, they have to submit fingerprints and have their identities verified. But if something like this could be done at a local post office, it could really make the process a little bit less cumbersome for these people and more efficient. To give you one more example, federal and state agencies could put self-service kiosks in post offices that let residents complete basic transactions there without actually having to visit a government office. Things like renewing their car registration, or if you lose your registration sticker, going to a post office, using the kiosk, and getting a replacement sticker on site. Or since the Postal Service already visits every address in the country, another possibility is to put sensors in postal vehicles that could generate real-time location-based data for government agencies to monitor a bunch of stuff like road conditions or air quality, wireless signal strength, or really any number of things in a really cost-effective way. And those are just a few examples. There are, I think, a lot of other really neat examples that the paper touches on, but I don't want to give everything away, Terry.
David Garcia is a research analyst in the USPS Office of the Inspector General. All right, David, those kinds of examples seem sort of obvious, like sort of no-brainers, but there's got to be challenges or else we'd be further down the road. What are the biggest obstacles in getting the Postal Service to approach this sort of institutionally?
Yeah, so, the Postal Service does have a government services work group, but right now responsibility for the different phases of the government services life cycle is split across the different components of the agency. So in order to boost this portfolio, the Postal Service could do a couple things. They could create a dedicated team that's responsible for the entire government services life cycle, doing things like business development and engaging with points of contact at other government agencies, to coordinating service delivery across all of the agency's business units. So this way, you would prevent fragmented outreach And it would also make it easier for the agency to do quality control, making sure that government services are provided consistently across the country. The Postal Service could also create a comprehensive strategic government services plan that might really help. So we found that some international posts have had success expanding their government services portfolio by doing exactly that. And, these plans would do things like define objectives, define government structures, funding needs, and also operating processes like how to actually identify and evaluate opportunities, because it really is about prioritizing. There are 50 states, I think probably thousands of local government agencies. So it's important to do things like conduct market research and analyze the data to identify the most promising opportunities.
So, David, I have two questions for you based on what you just said. One, the Postmaster General has been very vocal lately, raising the alarm about the Postal Service's financial condition. Right. Its precarious financial position. Why isn't that generating more urgency around planning for these kinds of revenue-generating activities?
It's a good question. So, the Postal Service did incorporate this idea in its Delivering for America strategic plan. They do have a work group. And in our paper, we recommended that they go further than that. We suggested that they actually do take steps to create that comprehensive strategic plan and really identify ways to expand the portfolio, because it can generate, much needed additional revenue for the agency. And they did concur with that recommendation.
The second question is just about the Postal Service's capacity. Do they have enough people with the right skills and in the right places to actually do the planning, the outreach, and the implementation?
I think so. So, it's a good question. The law actually requires non-postal government services that the Postal Service provides to do a handful of things. They have to provide a clear public benefit. They cannot interfere with the Postal Service's core duties, like delivering mail 6 days a week. And they also have to cover their costs. In other words, they can't lose money. So, really, it's a win-win. Government services can strengthen the Postal Service's social value, but at the same time, they're not a financial drain on the agency. And like you've alluded to, they can actually, if implemented effectively, generate a lot of much-needed revenue for the agency.
One of the tensions here seems to be between that self-sustaining cost issue that you just raised and the aim of this program, which would be to reach more underserved areas, which may be costly and not generate enough revenue. So how does the Postal Service, or how should the Postal Service think about balancing those two considerations?
Right. So any non-postal service that the Postal Service provides can't lose money. It has to cover its costs. But like you said, providing these non-postal government services can be particularly useful in more remote, underserved, or rural parts of the country where it's more expensive for government agencies to have physical offices. So again, it's sort of a win-win scenario. If the Postal Service actually does market research, proactively reaches out to state and local governments, and identifies places where the need is greatest, in other words, maybe where there's a shortage of actual government offices or where the private sector may not be sufficiently present to provide services, these would be really good opportunities for the Postal Service to step in and fill that gap.
So, David, if the Postal Service is going to move forward and really make this a part of its business plan, you've looked at this inside the organization. What are the one or two things that fundamentally have to change to make it workable?
Well, I think high level, developing, again, a formal and comprehensive plan for growing the government services portfolio, especially at the state and local level, could really help. So I think that's first and foremost. And then, taking it from there, beginning to do proactive research, identifying points of contact at state and local and federal government agencies, reaching out to these people and letting them know about, the services that the Postal Service could provide, getting a sense of where the interest and the need is greatest, and then taking it from there.
David Garcia is a research analyst in the USPS Office of the Inspector General. David, I really appreciate you sharing this report with us today.
I am happy to speak with you, and thanks for the time. And if your listeners would like to check out the full report, they can find it on our website at uspsoig.gov.
We'll post this interview along with, as David just said, the link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.